For more than a century, presidents have disappeared into history. Wars have redrawn continents, and entire populations have spent their lives chasing money created inside a system they were never meant to influence directly. The Panic of 1907 tore through New York while Theodore Roosevelt occupied the White House, and J.P. Morgan locked bankers inside his Manhattan library to stop the financial system from collapsing before sunrise. Senator Nelson Aldrich crossed the Atlantic to study the central banks of London and Berlin. Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act in 1913 after negotiations between financiers, industrialists, and lawmakers who understood something politically dangerous. Modern economies were becoming too fragile to leave entirely exposed to democratic pressure. By 1933, nearly 10,000 American banks had failed after the crash of 1929. Millions lost their savings, and unemployment spread through industrial America like smoke through factory steel. Entire towns collapsed beside the banking system. Bread lines, too. The Federal Reserve sits behind white marble in Washington, but its real territory stretches through shipping corridors, sovereign debt markets, oil contracts, pension systems, mortgage rates, and the invisible plumbing carrying dollars between continents. The Federal Reserve is not simply a bank. It is the mechanism modern civilization built after discovering democracy alone could not stabilize industrial capitalism. And once you see that mechanism clearly, the modern world begins rearranging itself around it. The meeting hidden inside the Republic. In November 1910, a private rail car departed New Jersey carrying Senator Nelson Aldrich, Assistant Treasury Secretary A. Pitt Andrew, and several of the most powerful bankers in the United States. Men connected to J.P. Morgan and Kuhn, Loeb and Company traveled under secrecy toward the Georgia coast. First names only. No reporters, no public record at the time. Their destination was Jekyll Island, a private retreat owned by America's industrial aristocracy. Salt wind moved through marsh grass while oak branches folded over narrow roads leading toward the island clubhouses. Most people imagine power announcing itself publicly. Real systems rarely do. The Panic of 1907 had terrified the American financial class, because it exposed something humiliating. The largest industrial economy on Earth still depended on private financiers improvising rescues during collapse. The system had outgrown democratic reaction time. That was the revelation. The architects of the Federal Reserve wanted a central bank strong enough to save the financial system during panic, but insulated enough from elections that public anger could not easily pressure it into destabilizing monetary policy. William Jennings Bryan and the inflation battles of the 1890s still haunted elite memory. The fear was not simply Wall Street collapse. The fear was mass politics touching money itself. Most people think inflation means rising prices. Financial systems experience inflation as the weakening of creditor power. That changes the entire story. Wetland silence outside. Financial architecture inside. A democratic republic quietly constructing a firewall against democratic volatility. The contradiction became permanent. The real purpose of interest rates. Most people think central banks exist to help economies grow. That is not their primary function during crisis. Their primary function is preserving confidence in the currency system itself, even when parts of society break underneath it. In the early 1980s, Federal Reserve Chair Paul Volcker pushed interest rates above 19% to crush the inflation crisis consuming the United States economy. Inflation eventually slowed. So did industrial America. Unemployment climbed above 10% in 1982, while factories across the Midwest shut down under collapsing demand and brutal borrowing costs. Steel towns dimmed beside the Great Lakes. Farm debt exploded across rural America. Millions absorbed the pain so global confidence in the dollar could survive. One decision inside the Federal Reserve reached directly into mortgages, machine shops, truck loans, pension systems, and kitchen tables across an entire continent. Entire communities were sacrificed to stabilize the currency underpinning the global financial order. Not corruption, prioritization. And the priorities become clearer the larger the system grows. The language surrounding central banking sounds sterile for a reason. Cooling, tightening, liquidity, neutral words covering decisions capable of erasing retirement savings or destroying entire industries within months. Modern societies prefer technical vocabulary because the real language would sound too political. Social triage through finance. The dollar escaped America. After the Second World War, the Federal Reserve stopped functioning as a national institution in the normal sense. The Bretton Woods system, established in 1944, placed the dollar at the center of global trade, while the United States emerged from the war with enormous industrial capacity and gold reserves. Most empires controlled territory. The dollar controlled dependence. By the early 21st century, according to International Monetary Fund reserve data, roughly 60% of disclosed global foreign exchange reserves were still held in dollars. The consequence became planetary. One rate hike in Washington could trigger layoffs an ocean away. Modern empire often arrives through debt refinancing. During the financial crisis of 2008, this hidden architecture surfaced into public view for a moment. Credit markets froze. Major banks approached collapse. Trillions appeared almost overnight. That was the moment many people realized something uncomfortable. Governments talk constantly about limits until financial systems begin collapsing. Save the bloodstream first. Explain later. The institution above elections. The Federal Reserve Chair is appointed by elected officials. That fact comforts people more than it probably should. The distance is intentional. Less cathedral. More pressure valve. In March 2020, as the pandemic spread across continents and markets convulsed, the Federal Reserve cut rates to near zero and launched massive asset purchases at historic speed. What democracies quietly build. The deeper story began long before the Federal Reserve existed. Currency is trust compressed into symbols. Credit is trust projected into the future. Not because elites secretly hate democracy, because industrial civilization itself produces volatility faster than democratic systems can comfortably absorb. That is the part most political debates avoid. The contradiction is structural, not temporary. Print too much and currencies fracture. Tighten too hard and societies fracture. The Federal Reserve exists inside that tension, whose future narrows permanently after the correction, not democracy abolished. Democracy constrained by the survival requirements of industrial finance. And perhaps that reveals something larger about the modern world itself. Most people still imagine power primarily through visible politics. Presidents, elections, speeches, scandals. Then the machinery surfaces briefly, and people realize how much of civilization operates through structures they never voted for, rarely think about, and cannot easily change once established. The Federal Reserve belongs to that hidden layer, because eventually every industrial society reaches the same threshold. How much democracy can survive inside systems operating at the speed of financial panic, and how much distance from democracy can survive before populations begin sensing the machinery above them? The answer keeps shifting. The architecture remains.